Jesus. Well, good morning, everyone, and we hope that everyone had a delightful Christmas. We enjoyed the cards and the gifts that sent in, and thinking of each and every one of you as a beautiful, beautiful light, and that we dance this dance together as we twirl through this existence in the experience of eternity. This morning I would like to start by reading a couple of things to you, and I do that because otherwise I will get caught up in the talk and completely forget them. The first I want to read to you is the very, very first page of the Science of Mind textbook by Ernest Holmes. Now, Ernest fancied himself a poet. In fact, I'll tell you this little story. Towards the end of his life, he and his brother Fenwick were working on a poem, The Voice Celestial, which is based off of a work that comes to us from the East. And Ernest's wives passed on, and everybody who knew him was concerned that he was just going to go. He was just going to leave and follow her. And they were talking to him, and he said, "I can't go yet. I have to finish this poem. When I finish this poem, then I can go." So he and Fenwick worked, and I think they worked for like another year, and he finished it, and he left. But this is the very first page of the textbook. And I'm saying this is the bookends of his life, if you think of this. He started this textbook with a poem. He finished his life with a poem, and there's a reason for the poetry. But the poem is about peace. Peace be unto thee, stranger. Peace be unto thee, stranger, and enter and be not afraid. I have left the gate open, and thou art welcome in my home. There is room in my house for all. I have swept the hearth and lighted the fire. The room is warm and cheerful, and you will find comfort and rest within. The table is laid, and the fruits of life are spread before thee. The wine is here also. It sparkles in the light. I have set a chair for you where the sunbeams dance through the shade. Sit, rest, refresh your soul. Eat of the fruit, drink of the wine. All is yours, and you are welcome. And now I'm going to read to you the definition of peace that is contained in the glossary of the textbook, which I hope that everyone has a textbook, Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. And if you do, in the very back there's a glossary in which he explains the different terms and the way that he uses them. And I think that's very important, because so many times in our conversations as human beings, we use words assuming that everybody understands the same meaning that we do. And it may not be so. But here's the way that Dr. Holmes defines peace, and I want you to keep this in mind in relation to the poem that we just read, his poem on peace. Peace, a state of inner calm, an inner calm so complete that nothing can disturb it. The peace which comes only from the knowledge that it is all. Fathomless peace is meant by the peace of the Spirit. This is the peace to which Jesus referred when he said, "Peace I leave you, peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you." The infinite is always at peace because there is nothing to disturb it. A realization of our oneness with omnipresence brings peace. The peace which is accompanied by a consciousness of power. And I'm going to finish the quote that he started This is in the New Testament. This is John 14:27. And this is towards the end of Jesus' time here on earth. This is just before he gets ready to ascend. And it says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid." Peace, the peace that passes understanding. This is the last Sunday of the year, and the last Sunday of the year, Lori and I have just made it a tradition that we would dedicate the last Sunday of the year to peace. Next Sunday, the first Sunday of the year, we begin again. We begin anew. We will start right off the bat with what our concept of God might be. But today I am once again on a fool's errand. I am talking about the ineffable. There's no words that can do it justice. There's no words that can convey a proper understanding. And yet we have to use words because those are the tools that we have at our disposal at this time. We were watching, our Zoom group was watching some videos with Thich Nhat Hanh a month or so ago, and I started following some of his videos, and what a dear teacher. And he said something that just really struck home, just made so much sense. He said that down within each of us, there is a layer of seeds. Now these are things that may arise and may become mental formations, he called them. Anger, peace, love, joy, all of these things. Some of the seeds can rise to become positive mental formations, positive ideas, positive experiences in our consciousness, and others not so much so. And he says, and they're all there, and if one of them gets kind of activated, I call it, a button gets pushed, one of them kind of gets activated or nurtured, it grows within us. And what we want to do is we want to feed the positive seeds, and we want to let the negative seeds just stay there, let them just die out, let them go away. And he said he called them Dharma talks, which is the talks that he gives on the teaching, the Dharma. But he says the purpose of the talks, what the talks do, is they tend to nurture the good seeds, the positive seeds, so that they may grow, they may sprout. So I like that idea, that here we are every Sunday talking about that which is beyond words, that which is beyond thought, that which simply is, the I amness, the suchness, the isness, the allness that is the nothingness. And that doesn't even make sense to us intellectually. How could everything be nothing, you see? But it's not an intellectual exercise. It is not an intellectual exercise in the experience of the divine. The reason I said that poetry was important in Dr. Holmes' work, and if you read through his works, and then I've read through that textbook, this is probably the 30th time, I guess, going through it, at least. And he, at times when he gets into a very, very deep subject, he just breaks into, almost spontaneously, just the narration stops and a poem begins. And he starts writing this poem. And then after a page or two, or a paragraph or two, or whatever it might be, he goes back to teaching. And when I first started to read, he said, what is this? What is this all about? And now I've come to a different understanding that there are some things that prose just cannot convey, just cannot convey. But poetry starts to accomplish that. Poetry starts to give expression to a realization that is there, but the realization is beyond our ordinary capability of language. Music does this to me. When I listen to music, it doesn't even have to have a lyric, but the music kind of speaks to my soul. Art does this. The humanities do this, and this is why they are so important in our development. And right now we're seeing a push to kind of get those out of school, push those out of school. These are what help us to realize our humanity. This is what helps us to move to that place beyond words. So Dr. Holmes started his life, or started the textbook with a poem, and he finished his life with another poem. And in between, as he was trying to discuss the ineffable, to speak of the ineffable, he broke into poetry. And I only mention this now, I just kind of bring this here now, because we're talking about the peace that passes understanding. The peace that passes understanding. And you notice in the quote from the New Testament, Jesus says, I don't give to you as the world gives to you. I don't give to you as the world gives to you. Do not be afraid. Do not let your hearts be troubled. And in the course of the year, in the course of the discussions, we come to understand that the heart is typically used, as a metaphor for that part of us that is below the level of conscious awareness. Now, some people call it the subconscious mind because it's below the level of the conscious mind's awareness, but it is not unconscious. It is better described as subliminal. It is there, it is active, it is busy, it motivates many of the things that we do, and yet we are not consciously aware of it. When we were talking about Carl Jung and man and his symbols, he said the only way we can come to know what it's doing is through the symbols that it gives to us in our lives. But nevertheless, it is there. See? So we might call it the soul, we might call it the subliminal, we might call it our feeling nature. We don't really have words that can do an adequate job. But when Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let your hearts be troubled. It's not an intellectual exercise. It is not, it is not necessarily talking about a calming of the thoughts. Although they can come, it's a deeper meaning. It is a deeper level. So we have to go deeper. We have to go deeper. Remember last week I said, let he who has eyes see, let him who has ears hear. It's at a deeper level. It's not what it seems to be. It's not what the world would make of it. Many years ago, during the time that was running up to the first Gulf War, when the senior Bush was president, we in our country, we were contemplating going in and invading Kuwait and pushing Saddam Hussein's troops back out. And of course, the certain commentators on television, they at those times they become kind of cheerleaders for why we need to do this, and all of the things that you see them do. I don't need to tell you, you've seen them do it. And there was a gentleman who was a preacher in this country, and he started to gain some popularity in the press because what he was doing was coming out and saying, we don't need to be so quick to go to war. We need to understand what war is. We need to understand not only what we're doing to the people we attack, but the people who live there, but to our own soldiers. So naturally, because he was getting a lot of attention, the pundits brought him onto the TV show. I believe not out of a sincere interest to hear what he said, but rather out of an opportunity to try and humiliate him to gain ratings. So the man seemed very sincere. He came on the show. He seemed to be very sincere, and appreciative of the opportunity to explain his position in public. But that's not what the host of the show was interested in. He was just interested in creating drama for television. And the host looked at the guy and he says, yeah, you believe in God, I believe in God, but why shouldn't we just go kick the donkey dookie out of these people? And that was it. The whole thing about you believe in God, I believe in God, but put that aside. What we're going to do is we're going to go in here and we're going to fight. And it just struck me, at the time it just struck me that with one sweep of the hand, the entire business of believing in God was just swept aside for more practical purposes, for the purposes of creating tension, for the purposes of creating drama. See, that's the way of the world. And we're not talking about the way of the world. We're not talking about the understanding of the world. We're talking about something that deals with the heart. Something that is the experience of the allness, but yet the allness is the nothingness, you see. And here's the reason for that. Anna Marie talked about it. Emptying ourselves. What are all these different ideas that we have? What are all these different opinions that we have? What are all these biases and prejudices that we have, and ought to be's and should be's and all of these things? We're just so full of it. We're just so full of those things that we cannot even experience things as they are. We are experiencing things as our opinions and our beliefs tell us that they are. We have to get past all of those. We have to ignore all of those. We have to get to that place within that is one. And that's as much as you can say. It is one. It is aware, and it is aware that it is aware. The Tibetan Buddhists call this the blue light consciousness. Consciousness aware only of itself. Only of itself. See, when we learn to meditate, we learn how to focus on something, an external something or an internal something, but we focus on something. We may focus on a plant. We may focus on a candle. We may focus on the movement in mind that we call thoughts, but we are trying to bring our attention to something. And ultimately what we can learn is we can bring our attention to our attention. We don't need anything else out there. We bring our attention to our attention. So when we experience the allness, we are experiencing nothingness, because there's nothing that separates. In the way of the world, and to think of the world, if you give me a stack of lumber, see, in the way of the world, when it's there as a stack of lumber, it is just potential, right? It's potential. What could we do with this pile of lumber? We could build a house. We could build a chair. We could build a table. We could build a sun deck. We could build a lemonade stand for the kids to put at the end of the driveway. All kinds of possibilities. See? As soon as we take that lumber, as soon as we take it and we make it into any one of those things, suddenly it is separated from all of the rest. If it is a table, it is not a chair. If it is a chair, it is not a lemonade stand. If it's a lemonade stand, it's not a sun deck. We have kind of taken, perhaps the quantum physicists would say, we have taken the wave of possibilities and collapsed it into one specific. See? So that's the way of the world. That's the way that we think. But the concept of the divine, the I amness, the allness, and the suchness is that even though it is expressing itself as a table, for example, it is not constricted to that. It is not defined by that. It is a table, it is a chair, it is a sun deck, it is a lemonade stand. It is all at the same time. And it is aware of itself expressing each of these individualized expression without losing track of the whole. Without losing track of the whole. It is the allness expressing itself in some specific way and ways, and still knowing itself as the allness. It has created you and I. It doesn't make lemonade stands per se, but it made you and I out of itself. Now, as long as we have these barriers that were discussed in the opening quote, as long as we have these barriers, these ideas of separation, these ideas of I am this and I am not that, and I am me and I am not you, and all of those things, we are not experiencing the allness. And when we experience the allness, we call it the nothingness, because there's nothing to divide. There's no separation. There's no I am in the allness and you are not in the allness. There is just the allness. So the allness is the nothingness. The emptiness is the fullness. And intellectually, it really makes our heads hurt. So we're talking today of something that can be realized, but cannot be adequately expressed in words. And yet we have to use words to point to it. We have to use the words that we have at this moment to point to something that is beyond words. So the way of the world is that peace is the cessation of hostilities. Peace is the absence of war. Peace is that time, that interval between conflicts. That's the best human understanding that we have of peace. There's no such thing as eternal peace. There's no such thing as just perfect calm and perfect ease to the human mind. And Spinoza, who is a mystic, has a famous quote, and he says, "Peace is not the absence of war. It is a way of being. It is a way of being. It is a way of life." See, beyond understanding, the intellect understands peace as, well, we're not engaged in any hostilities at this moment in time. Therefore, we call it peacetime. But it's not peacetime. It is just time. It is just time for resting and then preparing for another war. That's what we do. Look at the history, from all recorded history. I mean, our earliest recorded histories are about warfare, and great battles and epic fights and all of these things. We must become the peace that we wish to see in the world. So you can take someone who is in a perfectly peaceful situation. If you took someone and they had all of the food that they wanted to eat, they had shelter, they had everything taken care of, they had no worries in the world. Whatever they wanted was provided. If they were not a peaceful person, they would not be experiencing peace, because they would find something to worry about. Well, how long is this going to last? Sure, they gave me food today, but are they going to give me food tomorrow? And what else is out there that I'm not experiencing because I'm just here, just, getting everything that I need? So the suspicions, you see, the worry eventually leads to a new round of hostilities. One country sees another country building up their army, and they think, oh my goodness, we better build our army up too. And we start building our army up, and the other country says, oh my goodness, they're building their army up. They must be going to invade us. And it explodes again. It explodes. That is the way of the world. But Jesus said, I do not give to you as the world gives to you. There is a peace that passes understanding. Now, we just need to consider a little bit the intellect and then the experience, the activity of the mind, as opposed to actually realizing something. If we don't quite have something yet, if we're just trying to discover something new or learn something new, there's a lot of mental activity involved in it. But while we are thinking about it, while our mind is active about it, while we are learning about it, we are not experiencing it. We are experiencing about it, but we are not experiencing it. We are not in that moment with it. Many, many years ago, I wanted to learn how to skydive. So I went and I signed up for lessons. And the way that they did this was, I can't remember how many hours of instruction we had to take, but we met in a hotel conference room, and we had the instructor there who ran the jump school, and some of his staff, the jump masters. And they had lectures, and they had graphs, and they had all these kind of things to tell us the physics of how a parachute worked, and then to tell us the safety procedures. And then they had us stand on a chair and jump off a chair and land on the floor and roll and tumble so that we would know how to place our feet when we came down and all of those things. While that was going on, we weren't skydiving. We were learning about skydiving. But then one day came where I actually got to get in the plane and go. And when it was my turn, in fact, I was the first one to jump. I was physically, I was the biggest person in the plane, and they have that person go first. So, but when that time came and I had to lean outside the plane, stick my head out into the wind stream, swing my legs around to let my legs dangle out the side of the plane, and look down, I wasn't thinking about anything that they told me. I wasn't thinking at all that I remember. I was just totally in the experience. Totally in the experience. And the jump master slapped me on the back and said, "Go," and I was out the door. When the chute opened, of course, otherwise we wouldn't have this story. And I floated down to the ground, and it was just an absolutely breathtaking experience, but it was a breathtaking experience. It wasn't an intellectual exercise. And after I put my feet together and landed as I should and tumbled as I should and gathered up the chute to take it back to the packing area, after all of that, I realized I hadn't thought of anything. I did not think, or did not remember thinking. I was just totally in that experience, totally in that experience. So there's a difference between thinking about things. There's a difference between studying about things. There's a difference between talking about things. And then there is the experience. The experience. My peace I leave you. Not the way the world gives to you. Don't let your heart be troubled. Do not worry. This is the experience of peace, the experience of the allness and the fullness and the oneness, the realization, the peace that passes understanding. So Dr. Holmes says that we experience that peace when we recognize our unity, our oneness, and we are conscious. We are aware. We are not necessarily aware through an intellectual process of thinking, but we are conscious of the omnipresence of the presence, of the presence which is all presence, the omnipresence. So we begin trying to use words to help point us in that direction. We begin, as we always begin a treatment or an affirmative prayer. What is our concept of God? What is the divine? And is the divine at peace? Right? Dr. Holmes says, God is perfect peace because there's nothing to disturb it. Nothing to disturb it. A few weeks ago I was talking about the symbolism in the book of Revelation, and there was the lake that was as smooth as glass, as smooth as a mirror, that surrounded the throne, that represented the place where that presence sits. And of course it's not out there, see? The way of the world is that peace is out there. Peace depends upon externals. When everybody does everything the way I want them to do it, then there will be peace. And of course there won't be peace. There'll just be a cessation of hostilities for a little while. I once worked for a company, and our boss was a complete tyrant, or classical bully. And he was always belittling people and being gruff and rough and all these kind of things. And I worked with a guy who just seemed totally unaffected by the whole thing. He just like water on a duck's back, you know. And I said to him one day, how can you just, be totally unaffected by this guy? He's such an idiot. And my friend said, well, he can only make me do it his way when he's watching. And he's only here to watch me, an hour a day. So the other 7 days, the other 7 hours, I just do what I want. That's the way of the world. The way of the world. We try to force our way to peace. We try to hammer our way to peace. We try to bully our way to peace. And it's not out there. It is a way of life, as Spinoza tells us. It is this communing, this experience of communing, not the idea of communing, but this experience of communing with the allness, with the presence. So we go back to our concept of the divine and we say, what is there to disturb the divine? What is there to disturb the allness? What is there? And this, you really have to think about this. We're going to go into a little bit more next week. But if you think about the concept of the divine that many of us have grown up with, is the divine gets angry. The divine has enemies. The divine is jealous. See, the divine is vengeful. Vengeance is mine. And all these kind of things that we may have been given these impressions growing up in our society. And we have to stop now and say, wait a minute. If the divine is truly all and all presence, what is there to disturb it? Can have no enemies, can have no worries. Whatever it wants to do, it can do. It has all the resources and all of the power. And now we start to get this concept of the lake as smooth as glass, as smooth as glass. Nothing can disturb it. It is the allness which expresses itself through the individual. In other words, you and I did not create the life that we experience. Our parents did not create the life that we experience by creating the body that we inhabit. The dust of the earth did not get itself together and suddenly create life. I mean, think of this, think of the way of the world, material world, is that somehow the energy became the matter, and the matter just somehow organized itself and created this temporary condition, this illusion of life, of consciousness, of awareness. And someday that all goes back into the dust, and someday the dust all goes back into the energy. And it was all nothing. It was all for nothing. It all meant nothing. That is the way of the world. And the way of the Spirit is that the Spirit of the Divine infuses itself into life as us. This means that the very essence of the life that we experience is literally the Divine experiencing its life as us. But because it is perfect peace, that lake, as smooth as a mirror, is the very essence of our being in our hearts. It is already here, see. It is not something to attain, for if it was out there to be attained, we could never attain it. It is something to be realized, because it is already within. So intellectually, we can kind of grasp the idea that the peace that passes understanding is already here. But now we want to experience it. Now we want to experience it. So Spinoza gives us the clue. See? It is not the cessation of hostility. In fact, it does not depend upon the external circumstances. In the email last night, I spoke of Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach in the furnace. On a more practical level, we have Viktor Frankl in Auschwitz. We have people who have told us that our inner peace does not depend upon the external circumstances. Now let's look at the ocean. And at the very surface, the ocean can be full of waves. It could be full of storms, It could be blowing a gale up there, which is when my dad decided it was a good time to go fishing because the tourists would be off the water. So you're on the surface of the ocean and you're out in a storm and you bounce and you rock, and you get wet. But if you just go a little bit below the surface, it's undisturbed. In its heart, it's undisturbed. So the analogy there we use is that the surface level is the monkey mind, the activity of our mind that is just jumping here and there and everywhere and going all over. And that is the part that remains disturbed. That is the part where we are forming judgments and we are forming opinions and we are labeling this is right and that is wrong and we need to do something about this and we need to do something about that. And it is just zipping all around. And as long as we stay at the surface, as long as we believe that that is the reality, that is what we will experience because it is done unto us according to our belief. But all we have to do is our practice, our spiritual practice, to move beyond that, to ignore all of that. It's there, it's going on, but it doesn't bother me anymore. I am not fazed by it anymore. I breathe in. I am aware of in-breath. I find that place within me that is centered, and I stay there. Now this is so important because we do our practice, and maybe we do our practice for 20 minutes in the morning or an hour in the morning or whatever, but then we go into the world, into the way of the world. We go to work. And kind of that peace that we felt, that calmness that we experienced when we were there in the allness, in the oneness, in the nothingness, it starts to wear off. So we need to refresh it. We need to refresh it. Buddha meditated 5 times a day. Jesus prayed several times a day. So why did these spiritual masters who have attained the oneness and the allness and the isness and enlightenment, why would they have to do that? Because we have to constantly refresh. We go into the world, we get caught up in the ways of the world, and we need to take that break to refresh. And we must do our practice. We must do our practice. Many years ago, a musician came to Wilmington, and his supporters had rented our center, and he was going to come and put a concert on there. Excuse me while I get a drink of water. And they were hosting kind of a get to know you dinner the night before, and Lorraine and I were invited because we were the ministers of that center. And I got introduced to the man as the reverend of the center, and he kind of immediately adopted an antagonistic approach towards me. He didn't have a very high opinion of religion in America. And he said, oh, Americans, yeah, Americans. He said, they're those people, they go to church on Sunday, and for an hour they sit there and listen to flowery words. They hold hands, they sway, they sing, they feel good about themselves. And then they go right out that door and go back to being who they were before they came in. He said, now when I was a boy in India learning my musical instruments, he said, I had a master who taught me. And I would go and the master would demonstrate something for me. And then he would have me to practice in front of him, and he would say, good, now you go home and you practice that until you can do it properly by yourself. He says, if I went home and left my instrument in the closet for a week and then came back for another lesson, the first thing the master would do is say to me, demonstrate to me what you have learned. Demonstrate to me that you have mastered the technique that I gave to you last week. He said, and if I couldn't do it, he said, the master would cancel the lesson. He would say, I can't teach you anymore because you haven't applied what you have already learned. Learning and applying is necessary to move the next step on your musical journey. And what he was saying is that in his opinion, Americans just kept going back every week to get the same lesson over and over, but never applying in their lives. So I kind of chuckled at him and I said, yeah, well, that may be true of some. It's not true of our group, but that may be true of some. I understand you. And that was it. He left me alone after that. But there's some truth in what he's saying, in that if we learn techniques, and if we learn about techniques and we don't apply them, we may as well not have learned. And if we expect to go further in our progress, and we have not applied what we have learned, we're just not going to make that progress. So what we want to do is we want to consider this thing called peace, the peace that passes understanding, the peace that is never disturbed, the peace that may be aware of activity, may be aware of conflict, may be aware of all the stuff that's going on the surface, but at its deepest level remains undisturbed. It sees all of these things as the play of energy upon itself, and no more, no less. So what I'm inviting us to do this week, and as we move into the next year of our spiritual growth, is to make a commitment to do the practice, to experience that peace, to find that peace that passes understanding. Not to analyze it, not to argue with it, not to think about it, not to say, but what about what I read in the news today? None of that matters in terms of peace. You can still be active in the world and be peaceful. In fact, you can be a great blessing to the world by being peaceful in the midst of the chaos. But Gandhi said we must be the change we wish to see in the world. We cannot look out there and say, you know what? I know what you people need. You need peace. See, we can't say that. We must first become peace. And then what we are, as Emerson said, what you are, shout so loudly I cannot hear what you are saying. And then as we become that peace speaks for itself, because it is speaking in a language that is beyond words. It is poetry in motion. It is God's love in action. And that is what each and every one of us truly are. God's instruments of peace. You know, the prayer of St. Francis is, "O Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." And by the way, St. Francis didn't write that prayer. It was written on a holy card, a St. Francis holy card. That's why they call it the prayer of St. Francis. But it says, "O Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love." And I remember learning that as a child. It was one of my favorite prayers. I took Francis as my confirmation name, by the way. But as I got older, I realized, oh Lord, I already am an instrument of your peace. Now, the only thing keeping us from recognizing, from experiencing, from realizing what we already are is those blocks, those barriers, those opinions, those mental formations, the activity of monkey mind that we believe to be true. And in our practice, we can learn to not take them so seriously, because it's all pretty much made up stuff anyway. So join me this week. Join me this week in taking time to simply be at home with the beloved. Not to ask for anything, not to try to change anything. Just to be at home with the beloved. That's it. That's the peace that passes understanding. It is already here. You are already it. Acknowledge it, invite it, accept it. Let everything else go. And so it is. Let's see here.